Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters, with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Smithville Communications, serving Southern Indiana with high-speed fiber gigabit internet. Smithville Fiber Gigabit Technology. Tap the power.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. After 2 sessions spent rewriting the state's criminal code, lawmakers are now faced with whether to allocate the money to implement changes.
It's just a matter of all the other budget priorities that tend to crowd in. So I'm not going to breathe easy until I see that final budget with the proper amount of funding that we need.
Historic squares are more susceptible to fires and more expensive than modern structures to rebuild.
It's devastating to people. Businesses lose their income, folks lose their homes where they've lived, and folks they just lose a sense of what their town used to be.
With entire communities at risk, what's being done to ensure burned out buildings aren't left in the heart of Indiana's historic towns? Those stories plus the latest news headlines right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Hello, I'm Joe Wren and welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. Indiana lawmakers convene next week for the 2015 legislative session, and money is at the top of their agenda. This year is a budget year, meaning they need to agree on a state budget for the next 2 years. One of the areas they will consider funding is the overhaul of Indiana's criminal justice system. As Gretchen Frazee reports, the money would be aimed at putting fewer people in state prisons and instead handling their cases at the local level.
At the Recovery and Engagement Center in Bloomington, Berdina Lee Oakley teaches an addiction recovery class using music.
This is something that you don't hear every day. So I pop this thing in here and put on this.
Music is close to Oakley's heart, but it's also something that's entwined with her difficult past.
I've come from a background of career criminals. My mom and my dad were both incarcerated in prison.
Oakley didn't have any other family, and when she was 14, she was sent to a halfway house in Detroit.
So there I learned a lot of street sense. I learned how to be slick, and I also found out that I loved drugs and alcohol.
Oakley graduated high school and got a scholarship to study operatic voice at the University of Michigan. From there, she went on to sing around the world.
I'm tossed in this wide world alone.
I toured throughout France, Spain, Italy, Germany, went on to perform in Switzerland, Poland, Hungary.
But Oakley still battled addiction. She was forced to come back to the United States and later found herself facing up to 12 years in prison for buying drugs. Her saving grace was Centerstone, an addiction center in Bloomington that helped her get into a recovery program.
Going on stage and singing was easy, but going through something, a 2-year program where you are accountable for every minute of your life, where everything is structured, was the hardest thing I ever had to do.
Lawmakers hope by changing the criminal code, they'll see more happy endings like Oakley's. Instead of keeping people with mental health and addiction problems locked up in state prisons, they want to help them find services at the local level. The reason is the growth of Indiana's prison population. It's been going up since 1987. Indiana's prison population has nearly tripled to 28,000 inmates, and that number is expected to jump to more than 31,000 by 2019. But at the local level, officials say they're also running out of room.
Our big concern is we have a jail cap. We have a federal jail lawsuit with a jail cap, And we can't put more people in jail than the cap allows. So if we hit the cap, which sometimes we do, we don't have a lot of options.
If counties are supposed to take on some of the burden, officials say the money has to follow.
There needs to be more money allocated for supervision resources if people are going to have to be supervised in the community, more probation officers, community corrections officers to keep people appropriately supervised, mental health treatment slots, substance abuse treatment.
We only pay for mental health and addiction issues when they get to that very severe stage, and in some ways it's like waiting to treat cancer with radiation until it gets to stage 4.
By some estimates, up to 80% of the prison population suffers from mental illness or addiction. And Kim Manlove says they aren't getting proper treatment in prison.
When someone who has mental health or substance abuse issues commits a crime, they immediately, once the handcuffs go on, get $20,000 worth of services, but those services are incarceration.
Representative Matt Pierce has been a significant player in the criminal code rewrite. His goal is to take some of that $20,000 and put it toward training more addictions counselors, organizing mental health services, and getting offenders into community corrections or home detention programs.
By getting that money down to the local level, they then can implement the programs that we know have worked in other places. That's going to break the cycle of recidivism, basically people committing new crimes. That's going to save us even more money, and I think you'll get a snowball effect. And we'll be way ahead of the game if we just make these initial investments that are needed to ensure we get the new program in place.
The problem is that moving offenders out of the prison system takes time. So Department of Correction officials say the state can't reallocate money from its budget to local programs just yet. In fact, the DOC is asking the state for a 3% budget increase for the next 2 years. Pierce says if lawmakers want to find the money to both fund the DOC and invest in criminal code reform at the local level, they can.
It's just a matter of all the other budget priorities that tend to crowd in. So I'm not going to breathe easy until I see that final budget with the proper amount of funding that we need.
Pierce says lawmakers should set aside some money this year and then reevaluate it every 2 years for at least the next 6 years. By then, he hopes the Department of Corrections will start seeing savings, but he emphasizes the initial investment is crucial.
What I've been telling the money people is quite simply the criminal justice reform will fail if we do not properly fund the programs at the local level.
Lawmakers haven't said exactly how much money they're considering giving to local correction and mental health programs, but the Indiana Supreme Court Chief Justice is asking for $10 million per year, which would be given out in the form of grants. And those grants would cover costs for probation departments and mental health and addiction treatment centers.
The criminal code is just one of many issues that will be discussed in the upcoming legislative session that begins next week. To talk more about the key issues to watch, we're joined by State House reporter Brandon Smith. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, Joe.
As we mentioned this year, it's a budget session, and we can't talk about the budget without education. What kind of changes can we expect to see there?
Well, one of the changes, and the one that could be the most controversial, is lawmakers looking at altering the K-12 school funding formula. Now, that's a complex measure that takes into account things such as the number of at-risk children and students in poverty. Suburban and rural school districts have been complaining for a little while now about a disparity the formula has produced. There's as much as a $4,000 difference between the highest and lowest funded schools, so lawmakers might look at trying to reduce that disparity. The thing is, any changes could mean less money for inner city schools. Another change could be coming to the school voucher program, as Governor Mike Pence wants to eliminate the cap, the limit that's set on how much each voucher is worth.
Well, and the governor has also said he wants to make some changes to the State Board of Education, which decides a lot on the education policy for the state. What changes might we see there that he would propose?
Well, he's proposing what many Democrats are calling a power grab from State Superintendent Glenda Ritz. The superintendent is the chair of the State Board of Education, but because she's a Democrat and the State Board is made up of appointees of Governor Pence, who is of course a Republican, there's been a lot of tension between them the last couple of years. So what the governor is proposing is allowing the board to elect its own chair, but that's a change the legislature would have to approve, and it would certainly be a controversial one.
Another topic that's likely to be addressed is road funding. What sort of issues do you think will come up with the Indiana Department of Transportation?
Well, INDOT told lawmakers last month that the state needs more than $100 million more each year for the next 10 years, and that's just for maintenance of existing roads and bridges. That doesn't even take into account major construction projects like I-69. And then the funding sources for roads and transportation, things like the gas tax, well, they're starting to dwindle. Now, there is a study that's going to be produced that's supposed to answer a lot of the questions about where we're going to find money for roads in the future. But that study won't be done until after the session ends. So for right now, it seems like lawmakers are leaning towards just maintaining the status quo on road funding in the next budget and then addressing the issue in a big way after that.
And of course, we've heard a lot about the push to eliminate the ban of alcohol on Sundays in Indiana. Can we expect that to come up again?
Well, it certainly has a better chance than it's had in the past, though I wouldn't say it's something I'd necessarily bet on. Tom Dermody, a Republican from LaPorte, is the new House Public Policy Committee chair. He's been more open to hearing the issue than his predecessor, and advocates have started a campaign to push the legislature to end the ban, but it still faces a real uphill battle in the General Assembly.
Okay, Brandon, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Joe.
Now for headlines, we go over to Sarah Whitmire, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thanks, Joe. Gas prices just keep dropping. It's the longest streak of declining prices ever, with 97 days of falling prices. If you've traveled over the holidays, it was a pleasant surprise to see prices hovering right around $2 a gallon. According to AAA, Indiana's prices are the fourth lowest in the nation, averaging $1.99 per gallon. Only Missouri, Oklahoma, and Ohio are lower. Today's prices, on average, are more than $1 less per gallon than a year ago, which means you could be saving as much as $15 to $30 each time you fill up. Health officials are blaming the flu for 5 deaths in Indiana this season. The CDC says the flu has become an epidemic and the vaccination remains 50% effective because of a strain that wasn't covered in this year's vaccination. Still, Indiana's health commissioner is advising people it's not too late to get the shot because some types of the flu are still covered in the vaccine. There's continuing speculation that Governor Mike Pence is preparing to announce his candidacy for president.
I'll accept the compliment on behalf of the people of Indiana, focus on their future and let my future take care of itself.
But there's at least one major obstacle that could stand in Pence's way as he ponders his decision. He's up for re-election as governor at the same time. State law doesn't prohibit running in a presidential primary at the same time as another office. But if Pence won the nomination, he'd have to abandon his re-election bid under current law. This week, though, Senator Mike Delph introduced a bill that would let the governor or state legislators run for re-election and federal office simultaneously. Democratic legislators are condemning the proposal, saying there have been too many cases of state office holders viewing their positions as springboards to higher office. 13 new laws have gone into effect with the new year. Here are the highlights. The first phase of the tax cut passed in 2013 kicked in yesterday, shaving 1/10 of a point off Indiana's tax rate. The average Hoosier will get to keep an extra $38. Moped drivers now must pay $10 to register their cycle with the BMV and will be subject to a statewide speed limit of 35 miles per hour instead of a patchwork of local ordinances. And a law that's puzzled students for decades has been repealed. School buses will no longer have to open their doors at railroad crossings. And it's worth noting there were numerous other new laws, but most of them went into effect with the start of the fiscal year, which is July 1st. Former Secretary of State Charlie White continues to fight to have his voter fraud convictions overturned. White was registered to vote at his ex-wife's home in Fishers, and prosecutors argued he was really living with his soon-to-be second wife in an area referred to as Overview. This week, White got a small victory. 3 of his convictions were overturned, leaving 3 affirmed and his sentence unchanged. In its opinion, the court wrote that 2 of White's convictions violate double jeopardy principles. White's sentence, however, remains the same because he was serving the time for the separate charges concurrently. White was removed from office in 2012. He's now asking the Indiana Supreme Court to hear his case. The problems for Megabus continue to mount. Indiana State Police placed a Megabus out of service Wednesday after a trooper stopped the bus for speeding and leaning to the right. The bus was escorted to a truck stop where the passengers waited to board a replacement bus. The driver was ticketed for speeding and suspension failure. Another Megabus crashed the day prior on the Indiana toll road near the Illinois border. Megabus is already facing 2 lawsuits for separate crashes on Interstate 65 in Indiana. The first occurred near Greenwood in October and the second near Seymour in mid-December. Early indications point to a good year for Hoosier farmers. Forecasters say Indiana is likely going to see a weak El Nino come late winter and early spring. That means dry weather during that time frame, making it easy for farmers to get out early and plant. Things are supposed to return to normal for the summer months with average amounts of rainfall. The state is doling out money to farmers who voluntarily agree to start curbing agricultural runoff into the Wabash River. In 2012, Indiana was named the worst state for chemicals released into waterways. The total grant money from the State Department of Environmental Management is $150,000. Farmers who qualify and are awarded money can use it to partially pay for water quality measures, including erosion control, cover crops, and fencing. Paoli Peaks is finally open 2 weeks after the ski resort originally planned to start the season. Warm temperatures has kept Paoli Peaks closed for much of this winter, but finally this week below freezing temperatures allowed crews to create snow using machines and spread it across the slopes. Paoli Peaks managers say they would have liked to have opened earlier, but they're used to having to be flexible.
For the most part, it's Indiana weather. You just have to be prepared for it.
Paoli Peaks expects to be open for the rest of the season now that they've established a good base of snow on the slopes. And Joe, you know, they made snow earlier in December, but as soon as they did, it got warmer, it rained, and it melted. But they say now they'll continue to make snow as often as they can.
Well, and it's supposed to rain this week, and it might turn to freezing rain. I assume that's okay for skiing.
I think that's good for skiing.
Not so much for the roads, though, to get there. So a challenging business.
That's a good point.
Thanks, Sarah. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Parts of 3 different town squares have burned down in recent years. We explore what could be causing the fires and what options towns have to rebuild. And we'll take a look back at some of the top stories of 2014. Next on Indiana Newsdesk.
We are a nation of explorers. We seek new ways of living, of thinking, and of expressing ourselves. We take risks, we learn from experience, and we keep moving forward. That's why we encourage and celebrate the explorer in all of us.
Frontline provides me with information that makes me think.
First I shout at the television.
You gotta be kidding!
You won't see this anywhere else.
The stories hit close to home.
Truth is a very valuable commodity.
They're uncompromising.
I want to do something. I want to take action.
It changed the way I actually live my life. It lets me make up my mind. I trust it.
When I watch Frontline,
it makes me angry and it makes me want to voice it.
I want to make a difference.
We can make a difference.
Frontline.
These guys are my heroes.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Historic town squares are considered the hearts of communities throughout the state, but over the past few years, several have been damaged by large fires. Officials say it's no coincidence. Construction materials and the age of the buildings make them susceptible. As Barbara Harrington explains, the process of rebuilding is often costly and complicated.
I started in my parents' basement.
Rosie Bridges was celebrating 26 years in business when her store on Lagoti's historic town square burned to the ground.
We open at 10 and I got a phone call from the lady that works for me, Becky, and she was screaming saying that my store was on fire, and I was here within 5 minutes, and the windows, it was this fire coming out the windows, and it was horrible.
The sight made Bridges sick to her stomach. Decades of a dream reduced to ash.
I've been here for 31 years, and it's a small community. Everybody pulls together, and that's just what we're going to do.
Bridges store was one of 6 businesses damaged or destroyed by the quickly spreading fire in November. At least 6 departments and more than 100 firefighters battled the blaze. More than a month later, the debris still stands in the heart of town.
Hopefully we'll get them rebuilt and we'll start our new memories, and our Lagodi will be rebuilt, and we'll go on and look towards the future.
As Lagodi looks toward the future, business owners must decide whether to rebuild. It's a dilemma the small town of Paoli faced 4 years ago when a fire in the old Orange County Bank damaged the entire southwest corner of the square.
Within minutes, the conditions deteriorated to just the blackest smoke you've ever seen in your life.
The bank had been renovated several times, but was originally built in the late 1800s. Town Council President Mark Jones says that's common of many buildings found on town squares, making them especially susceptible to fire.
The construction materials are generally old wood, and it's dried, and it's been sitting there for years, and there's no moisture in the wood, and it burns easily. There's generally no firewalls in between buildings, so it spreads easily.
For about a year, the debris from the fire sat and the community waited. Eventually, Hoosier Uplands Economic Development Corporation purchased the land and erected a new building called the Phoenix.
We're very grateful to them, and I don't know what we'd have done. We may still be sitting here with an empty space if it wouldn't have been for them.
There is legislation in Indiana that gives towns some protection if a business owner decides not to rebuild or demolish a structure following a fire. The Greencastle City Council passed an ordinance opting into the program shortly before a large fire damaged 4 buildings near its courthouse square in 2013.
There was a small fee that if their council or town board passed that upon paying the fee, that if a fire were to occur within the jurisdiction of a city or town, and the owner felt for whatever reason that they were just going to walk away and leave that structure the way it was, that the city or town then would have some recourse in terms of being able to access some of the insurance dollars that would have gone or potentially would go to that building owner to fix or to raise that building.
The city didn't have to rely on that money because the business owners decided to rebuild, but it gives officials peace of mind.
People's intentions the day of a fire are said with such determination that we're going to rebuild, we'll be back, and sometimes that gets to be a very difficult, arduous, and for some impossible task. So this at least allows a city or town to be able to have some dollars available to help remediate the issue.
Back in Lagodi, it's unclear how the small town plans to recover from its devastating fire. There are questions about what funding's available to remove the block full of debris, but at least one business owner is determined to rebuild her dream.
We're gonna get it cleaned up and we're gonna rebuild and, keep going.
Lagodi's mayor will meet with business owners next week to discuss their plans for the future. Indiana State Fire Marshal Jim Greason says many historic buildings on Indiana's town squares don't measure up to current fire codes, but must follow strict requirements when they're rebuilt. For some, that includes installing a sprinkler system and fire alarm system that can be monitored by local dispatchers. It's 2015, but before we begin the new year, we want to take a look back at some of the major stories we've covered here on Indiana Newsdesk over the last year. Here's a look back at our top 10 stories of 2014. Same-sex marriage is legal in Indiana.
It was like another wedding day for us, and that's pretty exciting.
I now pronounce you married.
Governor Mike Pence this week signed legislation withdrawing Indiana from the Common Core.
Some parents questioned the decision to use the nationally crafted standards when they began seeing changes in their kids' classrooms.
This week, the Environmental Protection Agency unveiled a new set of proposed regulations for existing power plants.
Early Sunday morning, ISIS released a video showing evidence of Kassig's death.
A while ago, we were informed that our beloved son, Abdul Rahman, no longer walks this earth.
A preschool pilot could begin as soon as the fall.
The FSSA will select 5 counties to participate in the program.
When the House and Senate considered right to work in 2012, hundreds of union workers and their families gathered at the State House in protest. This week, the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the law, and the Indiana Supreme Court heard a separate lawsuit. Hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers still don't have health insurance, so Governor Mike Pence yesterday laid out details of an alternative health care expansion plan. The plan is being called HIP 2.0. 21-year-old Andrew Bolt was shot to death on Tuesday.
You hope it doesn't happen, but you have to assume that it might.
Advocates for using non-lethal methods to control Bloomington's deer population aren't giving up their fight. The Bloomington City Council approved a plan earlier this year to hire a sharpshooting firm to kill up to 100 deer at Griffey Lake Nature Preserve. Coach Tom Crean and the team came under fire this past weekend when 3 players were issued 4-game suspensions.
National media, former players, and fans question whether Tom Crean could keep his job. How long it will take the Indiana basketball program to recover depends on the team and their fans. And to kick off the new year, a group of brave Hoosiers took the polar bear plunge in Bloomington. At Fairfax Beach at Lake Monroe, a few hundred people ran into the cold, dark green water on New Year's Day, and our very own reporter Drew Dodlin took part, sending us back this video. The plunge has a costume theme every year. This year's theme was hippies. That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news in Southern Indiana throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following: Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Smithville Communications, serving Southern Indiana with high-speed fiber gigabit internet. Smithville Fiber Gigabit Technology. Tap the power.
And by WTIU members. Thank you.